by far the biggest drivers to success is just setting up an environment to execute progressive training for more weeks out of the year.
It's a framework from principles from the research, plus the tools to solve all sorts of problems.
We've tried to implement all of these ideas from research, from practice, from our experience to deliver the best results to as many people as possible.
What's up, everyone? Kristen Dunsmore here, and I am sitting with Josh and Zach from DDS.
Who's who?
Who's who?
Yeah, which one's Josh and which one's Zach?
I don't know. You guys look exactly alike.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell the difference. Zach Robinson, Dr. Zach Robinson, and Josh Pelland.
Ooh, nice.
Right?
Thought we were gonna go with the
Yeah, that was good.
The Pelland.
Okay.
That's always my favorite.
Yeah, my favorite is
PhDC.
when certain individuals that have known me for at least 5 years, they call me Josh Pelland, or the worst is when the best is when they put in an R, so they say Pelland.
I haven't heard.
Pellard's
okay.
always a good one, but
so I got it right.
You nailed it.
All right, so we have some exciting announcement to share with everyone. So I've been part of Evolve for 3 years now, and most recently you guys decided to be a part of it. And so my question to you is, what made you decide to want to be a part of Evolve in the first place?
I can kick this one off.
Go for it.
So I guess to maybe take a few steps back, we've been interested in programming at scale more generally for at least 5 years, something like that.
Long time.
And when I say programming at scale, I mean a pretty specific thing, and also mean a thing that's kind of evolved over time. No pun intended.
Nice.
In terms of what we actually think that means and what the goals of that are. So we started Data-Driven Strength technically in 2018 or 2019, something like that. I always get a little bit confused, but it started as, and it still is primarily a company that offers one-on-one coaching services. And we, up to this point, we've had a couple of products that have aimed to enter that market of programming at scale. And the first of those products was called Data-Driven Strength Individualized Programming, or DDSIP, which is a mouthful.
Super
very
good marketing
unique,
name,
by the way.
Yeah, very unique.
And you had Infinity, right?
Yeah.
Is
so
your most recent.
So that Infinity was kind of the second version of that, if you will. So
Better name.
Yeah, I remember when we released that in 2021 or 2020, something like that.
Sounds right.
And I remember being worried. I was like, my clients don't need me anymore, because I had a medium. I've maintained a medium-sized coaching roster throughout this time, and I was like, my clients don't need me anymore. Like, I've automated everything, and that's just an example of maybe we'll circle back to in terms of how our thinking of this has kind of changed over time and what these sorts of products deliver. But long story short, we had DDSIP. We were very, very encouraged by the range of folks that used it. We had a couple people win national championships using DDSIP. We had outright, not beginners like first time in the gym, but kind of strength curious people, or people just kind of getting into more structured programming. So we had a very wide range of people use DDSIP. That encouraged us to continue to kind of push the envelope within the constraints we had as a company, and develop what we called Infinity, which was basically taking the bones of DDSIP and making it a lot more extensive in terms of what it could accomplish. But we've always been bottlenecked by just bandwidth, software constraints, because those were delivered in Google Sheets. And I wish Garrett was here, because we could probably nerd out on spreadsheets and limitations thereof. And also, in a lot of ways, the pros of them, because they allowed us to move quickly, and they allowed us to, honestly, in hindsight, like do some pretty cool stuff. At least things that I feel proud about in terms of pushing the envelope, and we learned a lot along the way. But we ultimately got to the point where we said, what's holding us back? What's the reason that this isn't like the fully actualized version of this product, if you will? And ultimately, we found a good marriage by joining you and Garrett and the rest of the team at Evolve to take what we believe to be really good programming principles and bones, if you will, and integrating that with a good user interface, a good user experience. So it just made sense from both parties, and we're excited to be here, excited for what's to come very soon in terms of getting a lot of those programming bones, if you will, a lot of those programming principles to a larger group of people, and most importantly, continuing to improve it as we go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add. We kind of stole the whole thunder. But yeah, I mean, we've been interested in delivering something in this kind of area for a really long time, and I can remember, having like ideas of what we could accomplish in spreadsheets for like basically ever since we started data-driven strength, and that idea of like what exactly we're trying to accomplish, like Josh said, is just continued to crystallize over time. And I think honestly, in a lot of ways, I'm glad that we've had a lot of this like slow plate experience, if you will, because we've made a lot of mistakes. We have really honed in on what we think are the highest leverage things for potential, users of Evolve to would really highlight their experience and lead them to more success, and also made a lot of mistakes on focusing on completely the wrong things. And I think that is where I think having a more mature product like Evolve and our experience is an even better kind of pairing, because we both have made a lot of mistakes and have learned from what not to do, but also have a lot of areas where we've succeeded and can double down on the things that have made us successful. And then you combine the fact that we both have our kind of separate experiences, and kind of integrating those together, I think just allows for new ground to be, traversed that I think we probably wouldn't have got by ourselves. So yeah, we've had a lot of experience, like Josh said, and kind of hit some walls in terms of what we could and couldn't do with the tools that we had at our disposal. And now I'm excited to hopefully take that in a new direction and use some of the foundation that you guys have to just hopefully take things to even higher heights. So. Yeah.
Josh, when before you had actually committed to working with Evolve, you had sent me a message, and you had asked me why have I stuck around? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
And
when you started that, I was like, what is she going to say?
So at the time, I think my response to you was I saw the potential of what Evolve could be. And I started this, from the very beginning, from the initial launch that we did about 3 years ago. And there was obviously a lot of issues at that time. But the reason that I say it is because it was like, I see something in this product. I don't know what it is. And if you were to ask me directly at that time, I couldn't give you a direct answer of where I saw it going. But now having like a clearer understanding of with you guys, and just the programming aspect of what we're trying to do here, I see that coming into play, and I kind of see this vision being like, this is what I thought we had.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think like I said, it was a marriage that just makes sense based on where Evolve was at when we started talking to you guys, and where we were at. Mm-hmm. And on our end, we have specific values that we always want to adhere to, and we have also, since we started Data-Driven Strength, and also just since we started lifting in general, let alone conducting research in the area, coaching people, that sort of thing. There's certain things that we have opinions on, and at times quite strong opinions on, that are quite important. I think we have a better perspective now to not miss the forest for the trees, if you will. So there were certain things when we started talking to you and to Garrett, that you guys, I think, were on the right track with a lot of things, and we're starting to notice some of those things as well that could bring the product, bring the app, bring the programming to the next level. Mm-hmm. And there was a clear space for us to help potentially accelerate that and provide another perspective to kind of, again, expedite that leveling up, if you will. And yeah, I mean, it's important to us to understand at the time. The reason I kind of asked you that is like, why are you doing this, right? Like those are fundamental questions that I think can be overlooked when you go on an endeavor like this. Is you can do it for a lot of different reasons. You can do it because you want to replace all coaches and you want to do it in kind of a vain way, if you will. You can do it because you see a market that hasn't been tapped, or a market that hasn't been underserved, if you will, or people that could be getting better results, which are some things that we might get into. But I think, like you said, maybe there was clarity to be gained within Evolve, is what the simplest way to put it. And I think over the last, since we started working with you guys, which I don't even know how long it's been right now,
November, I think.
yeah, it's been a decent bit at this
months.
point. I think hopefully we've been able to add some clarity to the direction, and yeah, I'm excited with what we got right now, and excited to improve it.
So with, because you said that Infinity is basically Google Sheets,
Mhm.
right? And so would you say that basically what you've done is, and obviously you made Infinity in 2021, you said?
Something like that.
So it's
Something
like
like that. Yeah.
4 years old,
I think we released it in 22 or 23.
23.
Yeah.
So 2 years. And do you think that you basically, what you've learned, basically as just a coach in the research that you've done in the lab, brought that into making this program that you think is going to be helpful to a majority of people, and then essentially just bringing that to Evolve, and so making not Infinity evolve, but a lot of those foundational principles, and then
Yeah.
maybe some changes, because it's 2
Let-
years and things change and we
L-
learn new stuff.
No, that's a good question. Let me add one point of clarity, and then I'll let you take the meat of that one. I think when some people hear like it was in Google Sheets, you think of just like a template. I'm not saying you were saying that, but you think of just like a template, like, oh, we like 3x10, so Infinity had 3x10. Whereas in actuality, there's a reason we called it Infinity.
Yeah.
We the technology, so it was delivered in Google Sheets, but what was running under the hood was some custom built apps that either we made or we worked with someone to make. And when I say Infinity, like we were constrained by the caps we put on the protocols. So we could have someone benching 1 time a week and deadlifting no times a week, or you could have someone benching every single day, in theory up to an infinite number of sets per session, but obviously we constrained that, right? So we were able to kind of create systems that allowed for creative solutions to problems and point people using the community aspect of the product towards those solutions. But like we've said a couple times, it was kind of constrained by the underlying tech there, but we kind of had the bones. And then in terms of, I think since we released that, we've changed our minds on a lot of things. So like when we think of the new programming engine that we've helped develop with Evolve called Genesis, which we might touch on a little bit now, but I'm sure we'll discuss more later, it's quite different from Infinity because our thinking, I think, has kind of matured and evolved over time. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the way that I like to describe like what we were like trying to accomplish with Infinity is that we were painting with a super, super broad brush. We were really inspired with, kind of our way that we were conceptualizing training around that time, thinking about how can we give lifters the most radically individualized solutions to the problems that we think they can face for a reasonable cost, essentially getting to as close to coaching as possible. So, sometimes isn't necessarily about the first program that you get. That to us is something that's less important, but it's more so the adjustments over time when you hit a plateau or you're trying to solve something in the face of, time constraints or things like that. And those are the types of things that we wanted to build the system to ultimately handle, those kind of longitudinal decisions that you have to make. Should I bump my training volume up? Should I change my frequency? Should I change my exercise selection based on where I'm failing in a certain lift? Those kind of things. And those are kind of what we designed Infinity with in mind. But the cost of that is that, like I said, I think we painted with a really, really broad brush. And I think that leaves some things to be desired in terms of executing the most important parts of training. So I think we really potentially overemphasized some of those decision making and making that almost so so flexible that
so infinite. It was like too infinite.
yeah, exactly. We almost had to. You almost had to look over the cliff to know that you're about to fall off the edge, kind of thing. Like we were just kind of running up the hill of like, let's make this as flexibly as humanly possible, without actually asking ourselves if this is getting people the most important training principles dialed in even more. So I guess a more updated view with kind of how we're viewing this is that we still believe in extremely individualized training solutions, but the nuance and how we get there, I think, is a lot more contextualized with what is the most important things to get people results. And I think just as like a basic thing now is like with every decision that we make, we're like, okay, progressive overload is by far the most important training principle. How is this change going to reflect the focus on that? And just things like that. So I think that's how I view Infinity, is it basically gave us the experience to go all in on making the most radically flexible training prescriptions that you possibly can, to the extent that it almost was a little bit too much. And I think now that we've had that experience of going with something that was individualized, better than templates with DDSIP, our first version, to let's break off all the training wheels, and we went to Infinity and made things extremely individualized and extremely flexible. Now we've had kind of the whole cornucopia of, one-on-one coaching, programs / templates that are not individualized, something that's a moderately more individualized than that, and then something that's so like literally the most individualized thing you could deliver in like a template-based format. We've kind of went along that entire spectrum. So I feel like we've learned lessons at each stop along the way, and then integrating that into Evolve with the infrastructure to deliver that in a user-friendly way. I think it gives us the experience to help double down on the things, like I said, that we've learned, and also trying not to make the same mistakes.
That's also run in parallel with kind of shifting viewpoint of the role of research.
That's actually where I wanted to go next, because Zach, you have some pretty exciting, or at least we think it's exciting, research. If you wanted to talk about that a little bit,
oh man, that's a whole other podcast.
Your individual,
yeah. Zach, can you tell us exactly what
in 5 minutes,
in 1 minute or less,
you can and can't say using individual level participant data and within subjects repeated measures? Crossover design.
No. I guess just to slightly hint at it is like, I think what individualization means has changed a lot to me over the course of my PhD and also just coaching experience. And I think that's reflected in our beliefs on how to best achieve those solutions that we were after. I think the kind of old approach we took to this was, for every single lifter, there's a finely unique kind of batch of training variables that are going to lead to the best results. Whereas now I think we view it much more in a principle-based approach, and kind of view it as a spectrum of possible training solutions that can lead to optimal results. And that has a lot of downstream implications. And I think without belaboring it and boring the listeners for too long, that's essentially the practical point of things, is that instead of I use the magic bullet analogy a lot, is like, instead of looking for the magic bullet of training variables, we're basically looking for training variables that are permissive to optimal rates of progress, which is just seems a small change, and seems like it's not something that's massive in terms of the implications it has on program design. But I think at least for us, like, that was a pretty radical shift in kind of how we viewed things. And ultimately, again, comes back to, okay, what is the most important thing that we're trying to deliver, and what's going to lead to the vast majority? People have often heard of like the 80-20 principle, and we talk about that all the time. Like, what are the variables that are going to, be 20% of the effort, but lead to 80% of the results? And just really making sure that we have the kind of the sniper scope zoomed in on the right things, and not overemphasizing stuff that, potentially is on the fringe.
Yeah.
Zach's being humble. Zach's being humble, and I'm
did pretty good. I think that was under 2 minutes at least.
Yeah.
Elevator.
Can you stop
please.
talking so much?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Wait, actually?
No.
I was gonna say that's like my personal, like, oh man, I hate talking.
It's
so
like
much.
oh dude, I'm about as wordy as it gets. So buckle in, folks. No, Zach's being a little bit humble, and I'm biased here and incentivized because Zach is my business partner.
And best friend.
Yeah, as established prior to recording.
How did you two meet, by the way?
The Ohio State University.
Yeah, so we met.
The Ohio State?
Yes, there you
and
go.
then Josh followed
Zach-
you here.
I actually met Zach at a Shell gas station.
Oh, true, actually. Yeah.
It's not High Street. What's the one that goes?
No, it's on High Street.
No. High Street goes north-south. What goes east-west at the north end of campus?
I think it was right.
Northwest. What goes east-west?
It was right by JO.
Wait, you
It was
guys
right-
really
it was
met
right-
it's not
at,
High
a,
It was
Street.
right on
at a
JO
gas
High.
station?
Yeah, we met at a gas station.
And
Maybe
how did
on
that?
Ackerman?
No, what's the one that goes east-west, the north end of campus, right by Jesse Owens North?
I know what you're talking about now, but it's right off High. It's literally right off.
It's
High.
right off High, but it's not on High Street.
I can't remember now.
Were
Anyway.
you pumping gas and just started talking about
No,
lifting?
I said yes to an anonymous ride, and that ride ended up being Zach. So it's a weird love
You're gonna
story.
tell him what I was taking you to. You're just gonna leave that to
It's-
interpretation.
no, it's a weird love. It's a weird story. But
I'm intrigued.
we met because we both did undergraduate research in the same lab. Zach was picking me up to go to a community center, like, I don't know, 20 minutes off campus, and I didn't have a car at the time. And so Zach picked me up and we went out there, and then we started talking about RPE, and you were like the first person that I talked to at Ohio State that was like spoke the same language.
Sure.
So that's where it started. But anyway, circling back to kind of research and how our perspective on that has changed since basically that time, really, because
Yeah.
that's when we both kind of got into it, is to take a bit of a step back. If you, and again, I have a certain perspective, I have a certain bias, but from my perspective, if you listen to evidence-based content these days, let's say in 2025 and in 2024, and compare it to a lot of the wording and the language and the angle that a lot of people took in, say, 2019 or 2021, whatever, things have changed quite a bit, and I think for the better. You'll hear people talk about something like sampling variance or something like credible intervals, and they'll try to communicate that to a lay audience, and basically just communicating uncertainty and the inability to draw very strong conclusions from individual data points, let alone
individual studies.
And not to butter up Zach too much, but I think the elements that you'll hear as kind of themes within evidence-based discussions these days started with some of the work that Zach has done. And I think that has accelerated the field, specifically evidence-based fitness, a ton, because basically what Zach said a couple years ago is he said, okay, we have all these studies, and what people do right now is they say, okay, we had a group of 10 participants do study protocol A, and we had another group of 10 participants do study protocol B. Maybe they differed in volume. Let's just use an easy one that will kind of resonate, I think, with the most people. Oh, interesting. In this study, the lower volume group did better than the higher volume group. But in this other study, the higher volume group did better than the lower volume group. And what people would do back in the day, if you will, is they would try to explain away that difference, because they would start with the assumption that those differences are indeed true, right? Like that, there's a reason why you had a certain outcome in study A and a certain outcome in study B. Long story short, that's not the right way to think about research. And as a result, I think some people recognized that at the time, a surprisingly few number of people though. And to be clear, that would include us. So I'm not.
Shout out James Krieger.
Yeah. Shout out James Krieger. Shout out James Steele as well. And so basically, people did recognize the value of meta-analysis to kind of pool things and get kind of a point estimate when you put everything in a single analysis. But what Zach said is, he said specifically for the RPE that you train at, or what's the term typically used in research is proximity to failure. So, one condition maybe trains to failure, maybe one condition trains with half the reps that would get them to failure. So maybe 5 reps in reserve on average, right? Basically what Zach said is, I think we can do better than just kind of boil it down to training to failure versus non-failure. And instead, we're going to look at this in a continuous fashion. So we're going to not necessarily treat one rep in reserve or 9 RPE the same as 5 reps in reserve or 5 RPE. And instead, we're going to look at it in a continuous manner. We're going to try to understand the nature of the dose response relationship between training closer and closer to failure and increases in muscle strength or increases in muscle size. So you can detect some signal from the noise and understand the physiological principle that underlies this. In hindsight, saying that now, I don't know exactly how you, the listener, receive that, but in my mind, that just seems so obvious. But a lot of things are obvious in hindsight, but aren't obvious when they kind of kick off. So I would say the most impactful work that we've done, and again, I give a lot of the credit to Zach on this, or at least I would like to think it's been impactful, are these dose response analyses on key training variables so we can understand the nature of those relationships. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. But are they the best that we can do at this time? I think so. And those are the things that I think have kind of shifted because, like Zach said, even when we were developing Infinity, maybe we would have thought that, Kristen, there's something magical about a certain rep range for you, or there's something magical about a certain exercise selection for you, or whatever. And don't get me wrong, those things are worth playing with. Like Zach said, individualization is key, but for different reasons, right? So kind of what the foundation of Genesis, of this new programming engine that we've helped develop with you guys, draws on these dose response relationships and our understanding of the physiological principles, allows the user to identify preferences and key characteristics about them to kind of build up to a program design that is going to be permissive to progress should the effort be there and should the appropriate execution of that program be there. And we try to give the tools to do that. And that's the opportunity we saw with Evolve, was to take those learnings, that work, our conceptualization of training, alongside with the practical lens that we've always maintained, and key it in with your guys' software and your own unique perspectives on things as well, which have been vital, and make what we want to make is the best app for powerlifters, the best app for people with strength goals and potentially other goals as well.
And coming from an athletic powerlifting background, this is something that I'm glad that you brought up, like personal preference. And because we always talk about programming and what's the like optimal program or an optimal rep range, right? And in reality, maybe there is, but it also depends on the person, right? Like if the ideal training program for me is 5 days a week, but I don't have time to train 5 days a week, or I just don't want to, right? Like that's not going to be the best program because I'm more inclined to not follow it or maybe skip a workout. So what's cool with Evolve, and I'm sure with Infinity too, is that you do have the foundation of the program, but you can also modify it into a way that works for you. And that can be anywhere, from changing the amount of sets you want amount of sets per week, all the way to, like how many days you want to train. And I think that's huge, especially for myself as a lifter, where my schedule is constantly changing. And so being able to have that ability is, I think, very helpful. And when you circle back to, when you first get into power lifting in general, right? Like, what do? You go on like Google and maybe type in some program. Maybe you heard of 5-3-1. So you click the program, you find it, you follow it for.
Have you ran 5-3-1?
No, but I did do small of.
Have
Nice.
you? What
I
are
did
some
not
key ones
finish.
you've run?
5-3-1, baby. I did that at the RPAC.
I did small of junior. I almost died.
Nice.
I think I made it through. It was squatting 4 days a week. And this, mind you, I'm a beginner, right? Like
Nice.
Never.
Nice. You don't even know those programs, do you?
So it's always interesting to me. The two things I like to ask. One is inspired by you, is the first time you lifted. Where were you at after like just learning how to move? Because you can speak to this better than me, because this is basically at the core of your dissertation. But sometimes people be like, I had to grind, and this was me. I had to grind all summer.
Baby.
I had to grind all summer to be able to put on a 25 on each side, so that when I went to my sophomore year of high school strength and conditioning gym class, I could at least squat 95 pounds, and I didn't have less than that on the bar, because that would have been really embarrassing. The second thing I like to ask is like what you how you decided what to do in the gym the first time? Because like for me, I didn't really get exposed to like 5-3-1 or small love or psycho programs or whatever. Mine was just like push pull legs, like how many sets can we pack into a session? Because that's why I got into it. I was like, I just want to get jacked. Yeah.
So sick.
Yeah.
I was doing West Side stuff to start.
You were West Side, okay.
That's hilarious.
I loved it, dude.
So
I still am fascinated by the whole thing. And
I actually
it's just
hate
hilarious
West Side
to me.
less than I used to. You know, when you first get into powerlifting and like
I think
that was kind of.
I think Louis was a genius.
Oh no,
He's
if you
super, yeah.
if
He
you
was
ahead
tune
of his
into the
time.
Data Driven Strength podcast, it's like there's
Louis got every
there is
principle right.
there is
every single one.
there is a possibility that there's like some weird funding going on between West Side Barbell and the Data Driven Strength podcast, because there are a lot of things that it's pretty wild to look back.
I genuinely I say that every opportunity that I can. Obviously we try to think we've contributed positively to knowledge, but sometimes I look back and just kind of think we've maybe like wiped off the glass that was already kind of there in terms of looking at the same information, but just maybe with a little bit more clarity, because I look back on Louis is the number one thing. Just like basically the max effort method, the dynamic effort method, the repeated effort method is basically the conversation around proximity to failure for hypertrophy versus strength, load for hypertrophy versus strength. Like and then also his strong emphasis on training your weak points is effectively strength limiters, which we talk about all the time.
Yeah,
too.
and those are things we can all dive into.
Yeah, and those are all concepts, but I mean, it all just kind of comes back to the point of like what we're trying to accomplish with Evolve, and specifically what you were mentioning in terms of adapting things is like, I think we have a much better compass now on the things that are going to be the most important to drive that individualization process. I think we were far too focused with Infinity on these micro adjustments to certain training variables that are based on tenuous assumptions about the underlying data, which you just kind of discussed why we have a completely different view on that now. Versus the things that you mentioned with having time constraints, shifting the number of days per week that I have. I don't have access to this equipment. Those seem like trivial things, but those are absolutely foundational to delivering a effective training program and executing that with high degree of effort consistently and being progressive over time. Those are like by far the most important things. So we try to keep those in the front view mirror, and then have these other kind of things running in the background that are going to help you do that from a programming perspective even more so.
Can I add one small thing to that? So you mentioned like the flexibility that we've really pushed for internally is like in like at the end of the day, no individual study, no body of literature, no bodies, plural of literature, no field is going to tell you exactly how to train. And we want to, as cliche as it sounds, empower the users of the app to lean into what we like to call training skill, which is, hey, if the app recommends that you do 4 sets, but your training skill kind of tells you otherwise, I think you should absolutely have the tools at your disposal to do less or more than that, or to swap exercises. Don't get me wrong, we also want to make it as straightforward as possible that someone that just wants to put their head down and not have to worry about those things. We want to make that as easy as possible for sure. But to circle back to something I said earlier about like when we originally released our first at-scale programming system with customization, I was worried like, oh, my clients won't need me. But what I've learned over time is those are very different things to give someone a very customized program, but then also kind of teach them the aspects of training skill and develop that training skill over time. So hopefully with Evolve, we can fill a need in the market, in an underserved market, of someone that is either interested in developing that training skill or already has that training skill and doesn't need the benefits of coaching, but they appreciate the features that the app has from like a practical perspective, tracking progress, things like that, but also the flexibility that it has. That's something that's really important to us, is the ability to dial things in, because if exercise science as a whole can't tell you exactly how to train, I don't think some algorithm built on that is going to tell you how to train. And that's a key principle that, or a key opinion that we have that we've kind of baked into our input for the app?
I think there's levels essentially when you get into powerlifting, right? Where as a new lifter, and like I said earlier, you go online, you find whatever program you want to do and you follow it, and then you're finished. And then it's like, what's next, right? Maybe you're not ready to compete. Maybe coaching, maybe you college student can't afford it, maybe don't need one yet. You see, like, what's the next step after following this program? And I look at Evolve as kind of, like you said, filling that need for someone who, may not need a coach or want a coach, or maybe has been coached for 10 years and doesn't really need someone to fix their squat at this point. They just want a program to follow. And I feel like Evolve kind of fills that gap that we currently have. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, what do you think does and does not drive lifter success?
Ooh,
Tough.
that's a loaded question. We could give a preview,
Yeah,
and we could allude to what we'll discuss in the next episode.
let's
That'll
hear it.
that'll be on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, I guess are you talking about more like training variable stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about it more from a high level perspective. I mean, to me, the number one thing that I kind of already alluded to previously was just enabling an environment that encourages progressive training. To me, that's by far the most foundational thing that is going to drive lifter success, no matter how you slice up the actual programming X's and O's. So to me, the things that Evolve hopefully can help do is essentially being that sidekick throughout any different, change in training programs. So like, you probably have this experience that goes like this. You start a training program. Let's say it's a 5-day-a-week template or whatever. Your schedule changes. Now I can't train that many days a week, or maybe I want to switch something around.
Now you have to buy the
And
4-day
now you have to
template.
buy the different template, or you have to just feel like this internal desire to kind of throw this one out because I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not doing it as intended or whatever. And the point is, like, if you can have a tool that is able to be flexible with you in terms of some of those things, able to track exercises that you haven't done for a while, but you come back to it, and this is something you always talk about, is being able to reference those past PRs that I haven't hit on the Cybex leg press for a while, but I come back to it, and now I'm able to actually have an appropriate reference mark, even though maybe I'm just having to hit this for this one random off workout while I'm traveling. That session is completely different if you have a tool that allows you to have an appropriate benchmark. And I think those are the types of things that are maybe less sexy on the front end. It's not some, dynamic programming, approach or whatever. But honestly, those to me are the most foundational principles that are by far the biggest drivers to success, is just setting up an environment to execute progressive training for more weeks out of the year. And I think that is the number one thing that we've tried to dial in the most, whether that's changing the number of days per week, like we said, the overall training split that you want to utilize, and hopefully even more down the line, where we're hopefully looking to improve that even further. But that's like the number one thing that comes to mind for me. And then obviously you have specific training approaches after that.
Yeah. So like that might seem simple, but I think it's easy to underappreciate what you just said about creating the environment and the nudges and the guardrails to execute progressive training, as much progressive training under the curve as possible over a long period of time. There's a lot that goes into that, because like an easy example that comes to mind is like the appropriate modulation of how hard training weeks are to ensure it's sustainable, because you mentioned some very difficult programs. Those can work for a short period of time, but they might take away from your ability to accumulate quality training under the curve.
For 52 weeks.
And also, something we could talk about for hours is how to conceptualize specificity. A lot of people hear that word and they think they know what it means. I think I know what it means, but there's always kind of layers to peel back there about what that actually means, especially something as multifactorial as strength, because we know that more goes into strength than just how big your muscles are or how proficient your technique is. So as I alluded to before, we kind of take that understanding, or at least that best estimate we currently have of the things that drive the underlying adaptations that we want, layer in the practical experience of how to kind of sequence those things, both in a week-to-week sense and then also in like a block-to-block sense, so kind of like a month-to-month sense, and how to empower the lifter to pull levers and nudge them in the right direction to ultimately get as close to their potential as possible via progressive training over a long period of time. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters.
So my last question for you guys is so we've kind of touched on Genesis. What is it? Just very briefly. How would you describe it?
Got anything out of the bag? I'm trying to think what the.
This is a preview.
Yeah.
A bit of a preview.
It's a preview.
Genesis is a flexible programming system built on the principles and periodization that, in our mind, are the principles and the periodization are drawn from concepts we get from research, but the application of that is almost exclusively experience driven. So something that, again, not to butter Zach up too much, but something that I think Zach, I've always thought he's done I'll say a good job, not a great job. I always thought you'd done a good job of taking very, very complex and convoluted situations like an injury or a weird training schedule or something that, just to put it frankly, the average coach would just have no idea how to solve the problem and how to get someone over the hump. So take an example like that. Okay, this person hasn't been on the world stage in 10 years, and given the rate of progression in powerlifting, they want to get back there, and let alone the fact that over the last 10 years, the total thresholds for getting there have increased significantly, and their lifestyle has completely changed, and they have all these injuries. What are the things that are used in those situations from a practical perspective that are also used for the person that just finished 531 that is looking to get that additional level of targeted, specific, progressive programming? What are the things on both ends of those spectrums, on both ends of that spectrum? What are the things that are similar? And what are the things that, what are potential levers you also need to pull that we want to empower the user to be able to pull? So that gives us a framework from principles from the research, plus the tools to solve all sorts of problems. That's how I view it.
I like it. Yeah. Yeah, I think ultimately it's just an updated framework to deliver what we think is, and obviously we have to write something down on paper. I'm not going to say it's perfect. There's obviously things we might change our minds on going forward, but it's our updated framework on how we view what strength programming should look like in 2025. Ultimately, it's kind of the way that I view it. Obviously, again, like Josh said, that doesn't just come from a textbook, right? That's the combination of our research experience, our coaching experience, trials and tribulations through trying to deliver this at scale. What types of things work? What types of things don't work when you're trying to deliver programming in this kind of this medium? Like, there's challenges that come from delivering like even just the way you write a protocol is something we've grown to appreciate over time, to try to give as many lifters that receive this product that obviously is individualized, but you still have to make some standardized decisions on try to give the most amount of lifters the best results. And I think Genesis is ultimately, like Josh said, it's predominantly a framework that we've tried to implement all of these ideas from research, from practice, from our experience to deliver the best results to as many people as possible.
Yeah. And I like when we say evolve, and that the research and our programming is evolving. And so one of the things I think is
Kristen,
really cool about evolve is that it's not static, right? Maybe in 5 years, the way that we think about training might be different than it is now. And so the app will kind of evolve with those changes. It's not going to be static. And I think that's what's really, really awesome about this product.